welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOP-LP Newburyport at FM 96.3, and we'll be available on our YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I am just delighted this morning to welcome back to the show Susan Harvey. She is an historian, a retired high school teacher, and a curriculum consultant these days on genocide education, which is what she's here to talk about today. She's been on the show in the past to talk about slavery and about her research into the triangle trade, the unholy connection among slavery, sugarcane, and rum, linking Africa, the Caribbean, and Newburyport, and also past generations of her family's connection to the triangle trade. But she's here today to talk about the importance and the objectives of genocide education. So first of all, Susan, welcome back to the show, and thank you so much for taking time from your very busy life to visit the morning show.
Mary, I am so delighted to be back, to see you again, and I hope it's not the last time.
If it's up to me, it won't be. You can count on it.
Thank you.
Well, Susan, I wanted to start. I think that there's a lot of people who are not aware that genocide education has been required for middle and high school students in Massachusetts since December of 2021, when Governor Baker signed a law into effect mandating this education. So why was the law enacted, and what does it require be taught in Massachusetts middle and high schools?
This is a great question, and you're right. Very few people know about this. He did sign Bill S-2557 into law in December of 21, but the actual mandate to teach genocide education didn't go into effect until the school year of 22-23. The Massachusetts law places the study of genocide in the context of learning about human rights. Instead of teaching a single instance of genocide, this law encourages the examination of the common characteristics and patterns of genocide to, and I'm going to quote here, reject the targeting of a specific population and other forms of prejudice that can lead to violence and genocide. One of the questions comes up as to why. Why is this now all of a sudden mandated? Well, it became very clear that there is a widespread lack of knowledge of the Holocaust and the Armenian genocide. Both of those things have been in our frameworks, our history frameworks, for years. They were there when I began teaching in 2003, and I taught them. But I'm not sure that everybody has done that. And of course, it's much more than the Armenian genocide and the Holocaust. I think what we need to understand is how it's defined. How is genocide defined? Okay, so the Massachusetts law really bases its definition on the definition that the United Nations came up with. Okay, and I'm going to read this again too to make sure I get it right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. We've seen a good deal of this very recently, I'm sorry to say. But as to examples, we have the Armenian genocide. And I don't know if you're aware that Massachusetts has the second highest population of Armenians.
I did not know that.
California's the first.
In Watertown, in particular,
exactly.
There's a high concentration.
And that is a result of the genocide that began in 1915 during World War I. And then, of course, the Holocaust. And we have the Cambodian genocide. And
the Rwandan.
Well, yes, and I'm thinking about the population of Cambodians in Lowell. That's a result of leaving that terrible event. The Rwandan genocide, as you mentioned, the Bosnian genocide, and the genocide in Darfur, which is unfortunately resurging. The genocide of the Rohingya in Myanmar.
Yes, right.
The genocide of the Uyghur
Yeah, in China.
in China.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the law states that the teaching of human rights and genocide need not be included in every grade. Okay. But it has to be taught at some point in middle school and in high school. And that's to be determined by local districts, which I think is a good thing. You can't just, I mean, one of the things the state did several years ago was to mandate that 8th grade was civics. There isn't a district that didn't kind of, oh my gosh, how are we going to teach this? And this is what we always taught this year, because we don't do everything in exactly the same order, every district. So there was a lot of turning around of how are we going to get all of this information in and make sure that we have civics taught, right? Civics should be embraced in the teaching of U.S. history.
Yeah, we need it.
Well, yes, we do. Yes, we do. So, I mean, you know, these, as I said, the Armenian and the Holocaust were already included in our frameworks. And I realized when I started teaching, and I didn't start teaching until I was 50, because it was a second career. I just wanted to make a difference in my hometown, and that's where I taught. I was teaching about human rights and genocide in world history classes, in global studies, in US 2, which is the modern era. And I developed a class specifically about genocide. This was taught to different levels. It ended up being a year-long course for seniors. And that's, I mean, I think it became a little easier as you get older to grapple with some of this. So seniors were grappling with this. The challenge now, I think, is to get to the middle school and have appropriate lessons for the middle school. Now, I know that many middle schools teach the Diary of Anne Frank.
Yes.
And it seems to me that that would be a good opportunity to include a few other things. One of the things that I know you wanted to know about and are aware of are the 10 stages of genocide.
Yes, absolutely, which seems to me like it's critical for everyone in a society to know what these are, because one of the things I've learned from you, but with your list of what's happening currently, and then just that genocides happen everywhere. There's no culture that is immune to these forces.
Correct.
But they're predictable. You can see them.
Yes.
You can see the early warning signs, and I think that it's a gift to all of us to make sure that we all understand what to look out for, and not to assume ever that it can't happen here.
Correct.
So
genocides are planned.
Yeah.
They are predictable. And there are warning signs, as you say. Genocide is really never a surprise if you're paying attention, right? If you have some bad actors, I'm thinking about Bosnia right now, Milosevic and that crew who wanted an ethnically clean Serbian country. If those guys knew that at the end of the day they wouldn't win, they might not take it upon themselves. These people aren't crazy. They're just power mad. And getting rid of somebody else will make it possible for them to have what they want. So, when we think about how you're teaching this for the middle school, the level of detail has got to be different, right? But you would have to start with both, with the idea of the basic ideas of identity and creating the possibilities of us and them, othering, right? You make somebody into the other. And as I said, there are 10 recognized stages, and the first 4 should be included in middle school, and they are classification, symbolization, discrimination, and dehumanization. When we get to the high school level, I think it would be easier for high school students, in fact, I know it is, for them to begin to understand how genocides are organized, right? So that's number 5. And then you have polarization, preparation, persecution, extermination, and denial is the last stage.
Yeah, that's the kicker, isn't it?
It is the kicker.
All the violence, all the dehumanization, and then the pretense that no, it never would. And certainly there are plenty of Holocaust deniers.
Well, and more
today.
all the time.
Yeah,
More all the
that's right.
time. That is part of the big
Yeah, it's part of the
here.
psychology and it gaslights people. I think that's the right word to
Yes,
use.
it is the right word.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. And there's no closure for anybody who has had a family member who has been a part of one of these genocides. It doesn't just affect the person who may have been put in a camp or murdered. It affects the entire family and their family and their friends. And this is widespread. Perpetrators of genocide know this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it connects to another topic. I may have to have you back to talk about book banning, because with denial comes the erasure of history.
Absolutely.
And with younger generations coming up all the time, who haven't, been exposed to the history and the knowledge within their lifetimes, I think it gets easier and easier, sadly, for people to just say, well, we're not going to put slavery into our curriculum. We're not going to, because it'll make white children feel bad. And, as I'm thinking of Florida.
Well,
for example,
absolutely,
there.
absolutely.
And so I think it's helpful to put that within the 10th step, which is the denial of genocide, because that just creates fertile territory then for the steps to start all over again.
Absolutely.
With new generations, which circles us back to where you began. Why this law was needed.
It does indeed. It does indeed. So I'm skipping around here because I know we have some questions to cover, but I wanted to talk about
right.
what I'm. Okay. One of the questions that you wanted me to address was. What are my students' responses to these lessons?
Yes, I was very curious about that, and the different ages as well.
Right, and and I have only taught 9 through 12, so I'm working on looking at the 6 through 8 with different eyes about how they can handle this. I was a part of a genocide education day last fall, and did a breakout session on using film when you're talking about genocide. Some films are very graphic, and even if you're a high schooler or a college student, you may not need to see all of that, right? And there are films that are available for and appropriate for middle schoolers, like Swing Kids. That's a good one. So, I mean, there are ways to approach this, but the big piece of this is to make sure that you are getting to the students to create empathy.
Yeah.
You got empathy, you will not have a genocide. It's really hard for people on a surface level, at least, to understand how other people could do things to other people who look just like them. Or maybe, the piece is that if we do not get other people to understand that every person has the same hopes and the dreams and a life expectancy and everything, and families, that they are just like us.
Yeah. We all pursue happiness.
Absolutely. So the point is that there may be a difference in language, there may be a difference in where they live geographically, there may be a difference in skin color. Not underneath. Not underneath. Yeah. Something I saw recently, and this is another topic of white privilege, white privilege doesn't mean you didn't have a hard life.
Right.
It just means the color of your skin was not something that kept you back.
Right.
And I think that's another topic. But this all comes into here, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's important that people make that distinction, I think.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people, they don't feel privileged, know, but they also may not know about the history of laws that favored them, still favor them, economic opportunities.
Absolutely.
Inequities, for example, in how the GI Bill was administered.
Redlining.
Redlining, absolutely.
Right.
And I think that's the history that needs to be filled in, because that can be part of the denial as well. And perhaps there's a better word than privileged to use, because people do have a kind of a common definition or sense of what it means to be privileged.
Right.
I'm not sure what that phrase would be, but we can think about it.
Think about that for next time. That's right. So I did send you a list of books, and I would highly
Yes, thank
recommend
you.
going on to the United States Holocaust Museum. That site is a wealth of information, and that's where that list came from. And it's not just about the Holocaust. They cover every genocide and human rights issues. So please go to that site. But there are two other books that I wanted to recommend, because
please do.
the first, well, both of them are by Massachusetts authors.
Okay.
So that should make it easy, okay? The first one is a new book, came out in May, and the author is Janet Singer Applefield.
And I just happen to have been gifted a copy of this, so I'm going to show it on camera so everyone can see.
And it's called Becoming Janet, Finding Myself in the Holocaust. And this book is written in a very engaging and accessible way, appropriate for all ages, definitely available for middle school. Janet speaks to middle schools all year. And she goes to, she's talked to thousands and thousands and thousands of students. And finally, this book came to fruition in May, and it's quite marvelous. The second book is by an author by the name of Yasmina Cesic. And she is a survivor of the Bosnian genocide who lives here in Massachusetts. She was one of the very first medical evacuees from Bosnia to Boston Children's Hospital. I have used her book in my classes, and that book is called The River Runs Salt, Runs Sweet.
The River Runs Salt,
Runs Sweet. Yes.
Interesting name.
Well, it's based around the river that went through her hometown.
Ah, okay.
And into which her brother was thrown, and many of her friends died. But it's a fabulous story, and some of the things that she and her friends and family endured are pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure it's right for middle school, but
Yeah.
definitely I used it in the high school, and I think you would find it really.
Okay, well, thank you for those recommendations.
Yes, you're
I appreciate
welcome.
it.
So, I really, when you're doing any of this, to have students embrace empathy for others is the key to preventing genocide. And that's what we all want to do,
Yeah.
right? If you have no empathy, it's easy to classify someone as something else, to use symbols to define them,
Yeah.
to make them somehow other. And, unfortunately, we've seen this too recently. Immigrants eat pets.
Right.
You couldn't
The Haitians,
imagine
yeah.
doing that yourself.
Right.
So they must somehow be awful. Well, it wasn't happening.
Right.
But somebody came up with that idea and passed it along, and people believed it.
It was a rumor that grew into.
Because some woman lost her cat.
Yes,
Yes.
I know.
Yeah.
And you got to wonder what goes through somebody's mind that they come up with that fantasy about what happened to the cat. But the cat was found.
In her house.
Yes, I know. And yet, I think this is an interesting illustration of the power of rumor and fantasy, really, and a latent kind of racist bent that would lead someone to have this fantasy in the first place.
Right.
Because it's not something that would occur, I think, to anybody who had empathy or who didn't start
my
out with a
gosh.
sense of otherness.
It
But
would
then
never
that-
occur to them. No.
Yeah, it wouldn't. Really. But then the power of that, because it grew into something that may well have influenced the election.
Yes.
And it was dangerous. It's dangerous too.
It's very dangerous.
Because the Haitians in Ohio were threatened.
Right.
So that's a contagion. I think that's the word that comes to
Right.
mind. The contagion of rumor and
Right.
falsehoods, and the readiness of people to develop a whole kind of, I'm going to say, it in two senses: mind with a D on the end field, and minefield.
Okay,
in the explosive sense.
Right.
Because it grows and grows and then catches on. And if there's a readiness and a lack of empathy, and preparedness to make assumptions about people based on, in this case, a discernible skin color difference and an immigrant status, it can become a potent force that probably covers several of those stages, those 10 stages.
And I think it's been made easier to pass along those rumors with the internet. I think nobody, there isn't anybody who will disagree with that one.
No.
But the genocides that I have discussed or mentioned didn't have the internet. And
That's
it was
right.
still possible to do this.
They didn't need the internet, and it still happened.
It still happened.
Right.
It still happened.
Because the soil was fertile.
Absolutely. And so you've got to work on getting that fertile soil. You know, somebody asked me one time, how can you just teach this all the time? Well, it's too terribly important not to be honest.
That's the other, how can you not?
How can I not
When we live in the
teach
world
this?
we live in, with its vulnerabilities to cruelty and violence.
How can I not do it?
Yeah.
So,
And thank you.
well, I have to admit I miss my
It's
students.
not easy. So thank you, Susan.
You're welcome. I you know, one of the things that I love is that I hear from my students that have graduated and some that are still in school all the time. They text me.
Yeah.
Why do they text me? Well, that seems like a bad idea, doesn't it, if you're a teacher? But I took students to Europe every year. And incorporated some of the lessons that we were learning and introducing them to other humans.
Yes.
Who didn't speak like them.
Yeah.
Who didn't look like them, who had different ideas and different cultures. And that changed them.
Interesting.
So this is why they have my text. Because,
Well, that's great.
You know,
that's
got
part
to
of
have
what
that.
they talk to you about and text you about is the kind of the way that the experiences that you help facilitate for them have changed their understanding
Absolutely.
of who they are and their relationships with other people in the world. Well, that's powerful.
I mean, that's why I went into teaching.
Yeah.
I didn't want to leave the classroom, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, but there comes a time when you're a little tired. Mind you, I'm doing plenty. But, you know, you also use we were talking about the 10 stages earlier. You use the metaphor of the frog being put into cold water, or no, hot water, jumps out. Put that frog into cold water and slowly bring it to a boil, and it's done.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right. It's too late to jump out.
That is something that my high school students understood. I've used that. I think middle school students would also understand that.
Yeah.
That to be aware and to be empathetic. Many of my students have gone on to do things in political science and in human rights fields, and you know, it's marvelous to hear from them and to know what they're doing. You know, I got an email from a student. He graduated last year, and he emailed me. He said, "Well, I'm settled into my class, into my dorm room now, and I'm really excited about this, and I'm going to send you updates."
Oh my gosh! Yes,
that's exactly what I want. You know?
That must be so gratifying, Susan.
It's great because I mean that's why you do this, to make the difference in these children's lives.
That's right. And thereby to have an influence on the kind of world that they will continue to shape and experience.
Correct.
And a world full of empathy is a much healthier world for everyone than one that's full of fear that leads to terror, that leads to violence.
Yes.
So
I think I need a flag outside. I mean, I have an American flag, but I think I need another flag that just says empathy.
But that's where the power of stories. You know, we were talking a little bit before the show about having genocide survivors be able to come and meet with students, and how powerful a tool that is.
It's very powerful
because it brings it home. In a way that's very human, that feels very personal. And I think that kind of experience is indelible on the mind then. And so even if people run into different kinds of propaganda later on that might try and sway them to other somebody, that kind of indelible memory of somebody who has shared their experience and touched your heart in deep and powerful ways, that's going to stay with a person.
It does.
Absolutely.
It does.
And so it's...
and Facing History and Ourselves has a speakers bureau. And that they are located in Boston, and you can go online to find out what they can offer. Both the USHMM and the Facing History have great lessons for teachers to implement into their classrooms. I have to say that one of the things that Facing History did that I have used in every class, whether I'm talking about genocide or not, is we start every class on the first day with a contract about how we speak to one another, how we will treat one another. And I've used that for years. And everybody agrees. They come up with it. The students come up with it. I don't do it. The students come up with how they will behave in a classroom with their peers, how they're going to manage this, and then they sign it.
Oh,
and
interesting.
it's posted.
They make a commitment to it.
They make a commitment to it, and it's posted. So if somebody does something or says something to somebody, they'll go, remember that? It's up there.
Susan, I love that, because the other thing it makes me think about is that you're not being a passive recipient of your education.
Correct.
You're actively participating in your education and in the classroom community.
Yes.
And it creates a kind of a respectful bond around we're here as learners, which is, in my opinion, a sacred undertaking.
Well, I think so too.
Probably the most important one any of us engage in.
Right.
But I love it that they're engaged in, because they have to think about what they want for themselves.
Exactly.
It's like the old golden rule
Yes.
that often feels quaint these days.
You know what? Often they will include it.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's very smart. Probably should happen before every class.
Well, I can only do what I can do, right? So, I mean, the other piece of that is that I had my students writing in journals, and of course, before the pandemic, they were literal journals.
Yeah.
Pandemic came, changed many things, and now they're online, right?
Yeah.
So, and there will be prompts, or there will be, what did you think of this lesson? Or respond to Mrs. Applefield coming to our classroom, or Mrs. Cheshich coming to our classroom, or the Cambodian survivor, or any of this that we did. And to also ask questions that they may not feel comfortable asking in class. So that journal was shared just with me.
Yeah.
So we would have a conversation back and forth, right? And that in itself allows people to actually, students to think about things, I think, a little more deeply.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than, I've got the answer.
Right.
Yeah,
it's not... They use the word performative
correct.
in a classroom.
Yes.
Instead, it can be authentic and heartfelt.
That's right.
Because there's got to be a lot going on in the deep hearts and minds with this kind of curriculum, and it has to be a safe space.
It has to be. It has to be a safe
space. To be able to talk it through, or it's going to stay on the surface. But the impact of this kind of learning about what people are and what we're capable of, it touches us all very, very deeply.
That's right.
And so it has to be done in a space that respects and protects and encourages people, which is what I love about this idea of the contract ahead of time, because if one person feels safe, then that can also, and there can be positive contagions as well as negative ones.
Absolutely.
And for somebody to then sort of go a little deeper with the impact it has on them, creates a space in which others can also go deeper, in which you get to the really important stuff, which I think is about knowing what our species is capable of.
That's right.
And that brings me to something I wanted to ask you. Well, that's what I want, because I was thinking about this, of course, preparing for our conversation today, and also just thinking about our recent election and some of the things that unfolded, like the rumors about the Haitian immigrants and pets and stuff. And I was thinking about the use of fear as a way to cut against empathy. And that is a very powerful and very effective strategy.
Yes.
To quash empathy by encouraging people to be afraid of other people. And so this, to me, is an important thing that we all be able to recognize about our own psychology, our human psychology, that we are vulnerable to being scared.
Absolutely.
To be talked into fear. And once we go to that scary place, it's a very vulnerable place to be, because then the first person who comes along and says, I will protect you, from these, people that I have taught you to be afraid of. For people who are so inclined, and their empathy has a fault line in it, they are likely to be magnetized by that. And this is not exclusive to any group on the planet or any time in history.
No.
It's a human function. It's part of how our psychology, it's evolutionary, I'm sure.
Correct.
In its basis. And so I was thinking about, well, do you have to teach psychology and history together somehow? Because it seems to me like they are connected.
They are absolutely connected.
Part of our human psychology.
Right.
Is the role that fear plays, and to understand our vulnerability. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, Susan. It just occurred to me.
It's good.
That it's worth thinking about how important it is for us to understand our own psychology, because understanding our frailties and our vulnerabilities and our how we can be manipulated into becoming afraid of somebody that a moment ago we might have been exchanging pleasantries on a bus.
Right.
So I'm just curious about your thoughts about that. You're welcome for the question like that.
Oh, golly Moses!
Sorry. But I knew you'd
in
have
10
thoughts.
words or less. I wish I had that answer, because fear. I think fear of the other, people who find themselves in areas where they're not interacting with people from other cultures, which is why I took students abroad, right?
Yeah.
It limits your imagination.
Yes. Yeah.
If nothing else, to what is possible.
Yeah.
And to just looking at National Geographic. So it's, which is a great magazine, don't get me wrong, but I mean, if and maybe that will make you want to go someplace else.
Right.
Like we were talking before that I gave my daughter a book on the 100 best hikes in the world, and she is now north of Hanoi doing one of them.
And who knew this was a hiking destination?
Right? But that, literature can actually expand your mind too.
Absolutely.
So here we are.
Absolutely.
Let's definitely have another gig about banning books, because that expands your imagination. If you cannot get out of your small town. And do anything else. I mean, I remember taking students to Boston on a Monuments and Memorials tour. The very first one, they had never been past North Station.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, this is everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody. I'm not just talking about here, but everybody. If you do not have that imagination to see other places, to see other people, to understand other people, you're ripe for fear.
Yeah. And
You
if
are
you're ripe
ripe for
for
that.
fear, you're ripe for those beginning 4 stages of the 10 stages that can lead to horrible things.
Yeah. I mean, classification, how we define ourselves in relation to another, right? And if we don't observe the same level of humanity, then we can substitute symbols. And there we can discriminate against them. And unfortunately, when it's demonstrated by elders, by people in their family who are older, who are also doing that, well, then that seems right.
Yeah, right.
And that's, and dehumanization, that's the pets, the pet eating, which... And so, once again, it's so important
for young people to have the opportunity to have this kind of education. And it does seem to me, I'm going to think about this more, that there's kind of a curricular blending of some of the psychology of
Absolutely.
fear.
Absolutely.
And how and because this is part of how social media works then to all those nasty algorithms
Right.
that are at work. It seems as though we need to fear-proof. That's not the right phrase, but you see
I
what I'm
understand
getting
what
at.
you mean.
And I think that helping people understand how our psychology works, how we're prone to picking up fear, and it can be a contagion. They're just understanding the places where there are fault lines in our minds where we can be manipulated into being afraid of things that we don't need to be afraid of.
And this is where critical thinking comes in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, critical thinking we try to do in every class because you need to think critically about literature. You need to think critically about people who are in politics today, were before, your family.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
I mean, this is where I started with trying to figure out what role my family played in the transatlantic slave trade, because they arrived here in 1635. They were affected by it, no question. Impacted by it. So, you know, history's really important. It makes me a little crazy. I mean, I actually agree with the fact that the MCAS was because it had become entrenched
For a
and really
requirement for graduation.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, there was never a history MCAS. Thank you very much. And if you do not understand history, you don't know why we're here.
If you don't understand history, you're toast.
Yeah, well, you sure don't understand how we got here.
We'll make that a T-shirt.
That's right. Okay. All right.
Well,
next
okay. Now I have a question that is
Okay.
a friendlier, I think, easier one. I don't know if it'll be
Okay.
easy, but it seems like
Okay.
a good place for us to end on, given we've been talking about very difficult things, and these are clearly challenging times.
Yes, they are.
And of course, many people are very, very worried about the fractures that we can see kind of deepening right now. So, as an educator, I wanted to ask you, what gives you hope?
My students. And every young person that I have met doing this work on a genocide education. I remain involved with charitable enterprises. Just a couple weeks ago, I was helping with building beds for kids who don't have them in our area.
Yeah.
This is something that we started doing with the National Honor Society at our school. I think getting students involved in seeing what the fact that they all live in comfortable homes, and we're building bunk beds, primitive bunk beds, but beds for children who do not
don't
have them.
Yeah.
Right there, that's a lesson.
Absolutely.
Right? So and with our food pantry, and just the kids that I know are awesome.
Oh, that's
absolutely
wonderful.
Awesome. And that's what keeps me going.
Yeah.
And I know that there is hope for the future because they are so amazing.
Yeah.
They really are.
And they will be picking up the baton as time goes by.
Oh, absolutely.
And we need them.
We do need them. I said this to the National Honor Society last year. You're going to make some mistakes in your lives. Heavens knows I did. 20s. Don't take me back to my 20s. Okay. But,
God save me.
Yes, right. On the other hand, everything I did led to where I am today.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I can say sorry, but hey, you know what? I love doing this work.
Yeah.
So you can't regret. It's a waste of time and energy.
Well, there have been studies that have shown that regret's not such a bad thing. That people tend to regret things they didn't do much more than things they did do that might have not worked out so well, because if there's something you did do, at least you learn something from it.
Well, this is the point. You do learn from mistakes that you make, but...
Right.
Yes.
That if you just didn't do something, then it's just a vacant place in your life. Right. So it's interesting, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And out of those regrets and out of the things we learn comes, an integrated self later on in life, and somebody who can be as hugely impactful in your life work as you have been. And I cherish you for being able to have this kind of conversation with somebody as sensible and learned as you, Susan. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mary.
And I envy your students. My high school education is way behind me, for sure.
Oh, golly.
But I envy them having had the opportunity to learn with an educator whose heart is so capacious and whose mind is so full of wisdom as you. So thank you. You have had and continue to have a hugely positive impact on people in the world. So thank you, Susan.
Well, you're very welcome, and I hope to continue to have that impact for some years.
And I hope you come back here again to talk about it.
Thank you. Thank you. I will.
Thank you, Susan, very much for being on the morning show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mary.
That's it for today, everybody. Please join us again next week at 9 for the morning show. Until then, everybody, please be well.